The crew of Flight 1549 have become national celebrities ever since their plane went down on that cold winter afternoon 2.5 weeks ago.
Just seconds after takeoff, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 is struck by a horrifying threat. Engines fail. The power vanishes. Hope dwindles. With nowhere to land, Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger makes an impossible decision. Can he ditch the plane in the icy waters of the Hudson River? Will all 155 souls on board survive? This is the story of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, Miracle on the Hudson. On January 15, 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549, known as Cactus 1549, was set to fly from New York's LaGuardia Airport to Charlotte, North Carolina, with further travel to Seattle. The plane, an Airbus A320-214, was piloted by Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, a highly experienced former fighter pilot turned airline captain, and his co-pilot, Jeffrey Skiles. As they took off from LaGuardia's runway 4, everything seemed routine until a few minutes into the flight. At an altitude of about 700 feet, disaster struck when the plane collided with a flock of Canadian geese. The impact caused both engines to fail suddenly. Passengers and crew heard loud noises and saw flames from the engines, followed by an eerie silence filled with the smell of fuel. Captain Sullenberger quickly took control of the situation while First Officer Skiles worked through the emergency checklist to try to restart the engines. With no power from either engine, the plane began to lose altitude rapidly. Despite the dire circumstances, Sullenberger managed to keep the aircraft stable as it entered a steep glide over New York City. The situation was tense. With over 150 passengers and crew on board, everyone looked to Sullenberger for guidance. They were flying over one of the busiest cities in the world with no engines, facing the possibility of a catastrophic crash. Meanwhile, air traffic controllers scrambled to find a suitable landing option. Captain Sullenberger quickly radioed a distress call, alerting air traffic controllers that they had lost engine thrust and were turning back towards LaGuardia. However, he soon realized they wouldn't make it back to any runway. Instead, he requested to land at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. But as the situation worsened, he made the split-second decision that they would have to attempt a water landing on the Hudson River. As the crippled plane descended towards the Hudson, it passed perilously close to George Washington Bridge, less than 900 feet above. Inside the cabin, flight attendants instructed passengers to prepare for impact, while controllers coordinated with the Coast Guard to ready nearby vessels for potential rescue. At 3:30 p.m., Flight 1549 made an emergency ditching into the icy waters of the Hudson River. With no engine power, the plane touched down at around 140 miles per hour, resembling a hard landing. It hit the water once without bouncing, then gradually slowed down. After Captain Sullenberger safely landed Flight 1549 on the Hudson River, the immediate challenge was evacuating all 155 people on board. He quickly opened the cockpit door and gave the order to evacuate. The crew sprang into action, guiding passengers through emergency exits over the wings and deploying an inflatable raft from the front right door. However, the evacuation faced complications. Someone mistakenly opened the rear left door, allowing water to rush into the plane. This made it harder for passengers to escape as water levels inside the plane began to rise. Flight attendants urged everyone to move forward, even helping a passenger in a wheelchair navigate the chaotic scene. As freezing air and water temperatures added to the urgency, some evacuees waded in knee-deep water on partially submerged slides. Others, fearing an explosion, jumped into the river, swam away from the plane. Despite the chaos, nearby boats, including New York waterway ferries and the Coast Guard, arrived swiftly to rescue those stranded in water and on the plane's wings. Captain Sullenberger instructed ferry crews to prioritize rescuing people from the wings first, where they faced greater danger than those on the detachable slides, which served as life rafts. The rescue operation was tense, time-sensitive, but thanks to the coordinated efforts of crews and rescuers, the last person was safely evacuated by 3:55 p.m.
Tonight, Miracle on the Hudson, a jetliner filled with passengers, crashes in the frigid waters off Manhattan, and everyone on board survives. We'll have the latest on how the skill of the pilots and the heroics of first responders prevented a disaster.
On that day, around 144 New York City firefighters rushed to nearby docks, along with police helicopters and various boats and divers. They responded quickly to help after a plane made an emergency landing in the Hudson River. Many passengers were taken to the Weehawken side of the river for medical assistance. Passengers and crew members suffered 95 minor injuries and 5 serious ones. One flight attendant had a deep cut in the leg. In total, 78 people needed medical help, mostly for minor injuries and because they were cold. 24 passengers and 2 rescuers went to hospitals, and 2 passengers stayed overnight. 1 passenger even needed glasses due to eye damage from jet fuel. Fortunately, no animals were on the flight.
Significant hit coming down. Fortunately for me, I just hit my head and I came back up. But getting people off the plane was quite a challenge. But everybody did the right thing and got off the plane. And we got the people on the lifeboat as quickly as we could. And fortunately, we got everybody out. And I was fortunate.
Each passenger received a letter of apology and $5,000 for their lost luggage, with an additional $5,000 if they could show they lost more. They also got their ticket money back. In May 2009, they got back any belongings that were found. U.S. Airways also offered passengers $10,000 each if they agreed not to sue. After the incident, many passengers and rescuers had post-traumatic stress symptoms like trouble sleeping, flashbacks, and panic attacks. Some even started an email support group. Patrick Hartland, the air traffic controller for the flight, said the hardest part for him was after the plane was safe, feeling shocked and sad. A few moments later, Captain Sullenberger, when asked how he made such a perfect water landing, said it was because of his 42 years of experience, education, and training. He said it was like he'd been saving up all that knowledge for that moment. To prevent similar accidents, officials in New York City captured and got rid of 1,235 Canadian geese at 17 spots in 2009. They also put oil on 1,739 goose eggs to stop these baby geese from growing. By 2017, they had killed 70,000 birds in the city to prevent crashes like this one. The plane involved in the accident, the N-106 US, was bought by the Carolinas Aviation Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, which later became the Sullenberger Aviation Museum. It's now on display there, including its engines. After landing in the Hudson River, the partially submerged plane was pulled downstream and secured near the World Financial Center in Lower Manhattan, about 4 miles away from where it landed. On January 17th, it was moved to New Jersey by barge. The left engine, separated during the landing, was retrieved from the riverbed on January 23rd. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, initially determined that the plane had lost power after hitting birds, a finding confirmed by analyzing records from the cockpit and flight data. During the investigation, it was discovered that 2 days before the accident, the right engine had a compressor stall due to a faulty temperature sensor. Despite this, the engine was fixed, and tests showed it was safe to fly. Later, inspectors found evidence of damage and organic debris, including feathers, in both engines. The impact had caused significant damage to the engine's parts. The remains of birds found were identified through DNA testing as Canadian geese, which are heavy enough to cause serious damage when ingested into airplane engines. Because the plane was made in France, European aviation authorities and French safety investigators joined in the investigation, with help from Airbus and GE Aviation SNECMO, the companies that made the plane and engines. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, used flight simulators to test if the plane could have safely returned to LaGuardia Airport or diverted to Teterboro Airport after the bird strike. Only 7 out of 13 simulator returns to LaGuardia were successful, and just 1 out of the 2 to Teterboro succeeded. Now, you should know the simulations were criticized by the NTSB for not reflecting real-world challenges, like the time needed to react after a bird strike and decide on a course of action. In a specific simulation where a 35-second delay was added to account for these factors, the plane crashed. During testimony, Captain Sullenberger argued there wasn't enough time to reach any airport safely, and attempting to do so could have risked everyone on board and people on the ground. Ultimately, the NTSB concluded that Captain Sullenberger made the right call. They reasoned that standard procedures for engine failure at higher altitudes didn't apply here because the plane was too low and the crew had very little time to react. Although simulations suggested the plane might have barely made it back to LaGuardia, they assumed immediate decision without time for a realistic assessment. On May 4th, 2010, the NTSB released its final report, citing the cause of the accident as birds being sucked into both engines, causing almost total loss of power. They credited the positive outcome to several factors: the crew's quick decision-making and teamwork, including turning on the APU and choosing to land in the Hudson, the aircraft's certification for extended over-water flights, which meant it had life vests and extra rafts and slides, and how well the crew handled the evacuation. They also noted the nearby presence of boats and fast response from emergency crews and ferry operators as contributing factors. The report made 34 recommendations to improve safety, including testing engines for bird strike resistance at low speeds, revising checklists for low-altitude engine failures, enhancing pilot training for waterland, ensuring all flights have life vests regardless of route, researching better wildlife management and aircraft technology to prevent bird strikes, and studying how to make safety briefings more effective for passengers. Author and pilot William Langsweesh highlighted the innovative fly-by-wire system of the Airbus A320, where pilots use a side stick to give commands to onboard computers. These computers then make adjustments to keep the plane stable, which cannot be overridden by the pilot even in emergencies. This feature allowed the pilots of Flight 1549 to focus on restarting the engines and deciding their course without having to manually adjust the plane's descent rate. However, Captain Sullenberger pointed out that these computer-imposed limits also prevented him from executing the ideal landing flare, which could have softened the impact of the ditching. An NTSB board member described the ditching of Flight 1549 as the most successful in aviation history, emphasizing the crew's preparedness and quick action that saved all the lives on board. New York State Governor David Peterson famously called it, quote, "a miracle on the Hudson." U.S. President George W. Bush commended the crew for their skill and bravery, praising the emergency responders and volunteers who assisted in the rescue as well. President-elect Barack Obama also lauded Captain Sullenberger's heroic landing, inviting the crew to his inauguration as a gesture of appreciation. The Guild of Air Pilots and Aviation Navigators honored the crew with the prestigious Master's Medal for their outstanding achievement in aviation. In addition, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg awarded them the keys to the city, and Captain Sullenberger received a replacement copy of a library book lost during the flight. At the Super Bowl the following year, the crew received an outstanding ovation from the audience, and Captain Sullenberger threw the ceremonial first pitch for the San Francisco Giants opening game of the 2009 Major League Baseball season. His jersey bore the name Sully and the number 155, representing the total number of people on board Flight 1549. Passenger Dave Sanderson and Barry Leonard organized a luncheon to thank the emergency responders from Hudson County, New Jersey, who played crucial roles in rescuing 57 passengers brought to Palisades Medical Center following the incident. Representatives from various agencies, including the U.S. Coast Guard, fire departments, police, and medical staff, were honored for their efforts. Captain Sullenberger was appointed Grand Marshal for the 2010 Tournament of Roses Parade in Pasadena, California, in recognition of his remarkable achievement. In a lighter tribute, aeronautical chart publisher Jepson created a special approach plate titled Hudson Miracle APCH, dedicated to the crew of Flight 1549, with a message of pride and gratitude. After 30 years of service with U.S. Airways and its predecessor, Pacific Southwest Airlines, Captain Sullenberger retired March 3, 2010. His final flight included a reunion with First Officer Skiles and several passengers from Flight 1549. In 2013, the entire crew was honored with induction into the International Air and Space Hall of Fame at the San Diego Air and Space Museum, celebrating their exceptional contributions to aviation. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment below, and tell us what other aviation stories you'd like to see. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more documentaries, breakdowns, and the untold stories from the fascinating world of flight.